Believe we're live, and now we are being recorded and we're live streaming on Facebook. So terrific. So welcome to one of our ongoing candidate forums from the Progressive Democrats of LaPorte County. We've been very lucky to have all these great candidates, and tonight we're lucky to have two more great candidates. These are the Democratic candidates for State House and State Senate. So State Representative Pat Boy is seeking re-election to her third term as state representative for House District 9, and State Senator Rodney is seeking a re-election to, well, I don't know what you call this. This is your first election, but you were appointed by a caucus to fill out the last year. So you participated in the last session, which is important, and now running for re-election for another 4 years for Senate District 4. So
he's seeking another term.
Right.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us, and lots of issues at the state level. So we have all been very, very busy on social media and with our friends talking about this crazy Republican supermajority in the State House. And so so I think I'd like to let's do a little introduction. So Pat, if you could just, just tell us a little bit about your background and, why you're running and what's the most important thing about this race for you?
I've been in this position for 4 years. I was previously on the city council in Michigan City for 15 years, and I got talked into doing this. Just like most women, they ask you to run because nobody does this on their own. It's a terrifying experience. But I was a graduate of DePaul University. I've got a BA in English, which landed me on the Code Revision Committee in the council and the Code Revision Committee for the state, because I'm known as a grammar Nazi. I'm the oldest of 8 kids. I came from Chicago. When my son was born in 1977, I've been here since then in the same house. Well, actually, we lived in 2 apartments, and then 2 years later, we bought a house. Sorry about my eye here. It won't stay open today. I am interested in environmental protection. I got elected to the city council after I helped save a wetland in Michigan City. I didn't do it on my own, but I helped. And I had the biggest mouth, I guess. They talked me into running for city council. That was the first time I ever thought about running for any kind of office. And it was addictive because I was doing some things that were good for the city, and I really liked that. I don't like running for office at all. It's really hard. But it's necessary. And at least for city council, it was every 4 years. This is every 2 years. It's crazy. I'm not sure what else you want to know about me.
Well, that's great. I think that's great background. And I think that really, I know you well, and I know that that's a good characterization of you. Someone who's been around for a long time, has been a grammar Nazi, and is a champion for environmental protection. So that is how I know you, Pat, as well as being a good friend. All right. So, Rodney, if we can do a little introduction, just tell us again a little bit about your background and how you came to this place, and why you think this election is so important.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you guys so much for putting this on. So a little bit about me. I've got I've got some roots here in Northwest Indiana. I was born in East Chicago, but I graduated from high school in Chesterton, Indiana. Went to Bloomington for school. Came back home, worked some construction to kind of save up for law school. Went to law school. Always kind of worked in the public sector, whether it was working for the various prosecutors and public defenders offices, both in Indianapolis and in Northwest Indiana. Also working with the Department of Education, and found myself when I graduated out after law school, working with the Indiana State Public Defender's Office. So with that position, I worked pretty much in almost every county at some point, or at least in every region in Northwest Indiana, in the criminal justice system. And with that position, you kind of do like a legal autopsy, and you kind of take apart a case and you kind of really figure out what's happening, at the county level in the criminal justice system. And you kind of see the pitfalls and some of the issues that are there. You kind of see some patterns in Indiana as far as, some of the problems that are there. But ultimately, I ended up working as a municipal attorney after Karen Freeman Wilson, the mayor of Gary, Indiana, had reached out and said, "Hey, we are looking for help in our law department, and we've heard that you're from this area, that you could work well in this area, that you know a lot of folks in this area. So this seems like it would be a good transition for you if you're interested. It's definitely a challenge. So I ended up working with the city of Gary now for 8 years. So that includes, pretty much almost like a general practice for law with the municipality, with everything from, litigation, the, civil liability to employment law, administrative law, public safety issues, to major development, working on stuff like helping bring the casino to Gary, and working with the zoning and planning and all that. But ultimately, how I ended up in the Senate was, after being in a position like that for a long time, my predecessor, Karen Tyan, had kind of reached out and said, "Hey, I've followed your career a little bit, and I've heard your name around, and I think that you're somebody that I would be interested in supporting if and when I'm going to be stepping down." So she had made that determination, and soon enough, I ended up having a couple of hard conversations with the family and saying, there's all these issues that we see in Indiana, particularly in education. My wife being a teacher here in Michigan, in the Michigan City area. I'm in Michigan City right now. That's why I say it in Michigan City. But she's a public school teacher and then also a school board member. And so, I feel like there's a lot of questions that are always, that always arise, whether it's at the local level or in education or in local government or in criminal law. And it's kind of like, well, how do you fix this? Well, you can't until you fix it at the state level. And so when you get asked by Karen Tyan to consider running, you take that opportunity to do so. You particularly with somebody who is a legendary legislator like she was. So yeah, that's pretty much how I ended up running for this position. And then now seeking re-election at this point. So to run for another term. So again, thank you guys so much for having me. But yeah, it's been definitely a wild journey.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So let's see. Dahlia, I'm feeling like I have to control my own spotlighting. Sorry. So, okay. So I want to put you both on there. So I think, the last session, there was a special session in the summer that we all know changed the world and turned everything upside down. But if we start with the regular 2022 legislative session, I guess, I'd like to know from each of you, what was there any decent laws, any good laws that, what was the best thing that was passed in the General Assembly in 2022? Go ahead, Pat.
Nothing stands out as being outstanding. There were a lot of bills that we voted for because they weren't terrible, but nothing stands out to me as something that was really earth-shaking.
I'd agree.
There might have been something, but nothing I can think of at the moment.
There were a couple of things we got some traction on that we were able to get past that. But I'd have to agree with Pat's assessment. There's a couple of small things that was kind of like, well, this just makes sense, but it wasn't anything earth-shattering. I guess if I had to highlight some, I worked on an increase in our workers' compensation. So I think the last time we had increased our workers' compensation for our workers that get hurt while on the job, last time I think was 2013 was the last time we had an increase. And as we know, things just cost more than they did in 2013. So we were able to secure an increase for workers' compensation by essentially going after these ambulatory surgical centers that are kind of offshoots of hospitals that kind of fell in between the cracks legally, as far as being capped at 200%, like all other, eligible Medicare or not Medicare, but Medicaid facilities. So by being able to find the savings out of that and apply it to an increase for our workers, I saw as a win. It wasn't the increase that we were originally aiming for, but there's hope that will actually, we will be able to revisit that and continue to increase that based upon how the projections look. Outside of that, I mean, there were a couple of things that I had co-authored with some Republicans that, bills that just kind of made sense. So for example, particularly after post-pandemic era, and I shouldn't say post, but in a following 2020 and 2021, we saw the increase in overdoses and hospitalizations from drug abuse. And what we kind of realized was that the Department of Health, while they report certain aspects of it, they didn't have really comprehensive reporting as to what substances are being used in what areas, in order to kind of both help the legislature, law enforcement, and other policymakers address drug abuse and substance abuse. And so we put a bill together, SB 84, that would essentially require the Department of Health. They had the information, but just to accurately report what substances are being reported for substance overdoses and hospitalizations throughout, geographically where, so we understood from a statewide level where we need to be focusing our efforts. One of the other things was a Senate Bill 82, which I co-authored with Senator Lysing, which required, basically all students that are entering that college level, or high school that are about to enter college, or I shouldn't say enter college, but enter their junior and senior year. The requirement, they're provided with accurate information as to what is available to them for financial aid. So we're ensuring that kids are getting accurate information about FAFSA and about the financial aid that is at their fingertips if they do seek to go on to secondary education or post-secondary education. So, but other than that, I mean, there's just a handful of feel-good bills that really, I don't think they were earth-shattering.
Good. Okay. So Pat, I
Yes.
see you kind of waving like you've got something to add.
The only thing that I can think of that was actually helpful to me this year was I've been working on a bill on coal ash and regulations for how to take care of it for 2 years now. And this year, the chairman of the committee actually asked for a summer study on it. It was denied, of course, but he asked for it, so that there's some traction there, and I'm hoping that we'll go farther this year.
Pat, I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that. I mean, what did your bill try to achieve?
Clean removal of coal ash on sites and like washing the trucks, washing the tires, sealing the trucks before they leave the plant, making sure that nothing is escaping into the air when they load it into the trucks. And then to look at the whole site where there might be coal ash in the ground, to monitor it and to make sure that they get as much out as they can and take it to a lined landfill facility for coal ash. And
so
we have 86 coal ash ponds in this state. We have more than any other state in the country. And they have all kinds of toxins in the coal ash. And there's been a lot of talk about it online, so I don't need to go into too much detail. But the object was to get IDEM to make the rules, because the EPA said the state needs to make the rules. We're not doing it. So now we're pushing against the EPA to do that because the state has not done it. They have until December to make their rules. And so far they've had one hearing. And I don't know if they're going to get it done. So my bill might be back next year.
That's great. And I understand now there's a lawsuit against EPA demanding that they do require more for cleanup. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, it's not Indiana that's suing, but it would affect
Right.
us eventually.
Right. Some
And
private organizations. Right.
Yeah, and I'll be on a call with them in another week or so to talk to them about it with the rest of Just Transition and Hoosier Environmental Council and Earth Justice, to talk about the complete removal, because, like, for instance, not just in Michigan City, our coal burning plant is on made land, it's called, where they took coal ash and sand and mixed it and built up the land to put the plant on. After they removed Hoosier Slide, which was a sad thing in the first place. But because they had this empty space, the city let them do it. And this was in like 1930 or 31. And they've been putting coal ash just on the ground for years and years and years. It's called legacy coal. And there's no provision for getting that out. And that's going to be the same in every other coal ash facility in the state. So we need to make a change so that they can actually do something about it.
Yeah. And I know that you're working really hard with local organizations to get something done on that. That is just a
Yes.
huge issue. And you're right, it is all over the state. This is not just Michigan City. So
Right.
this is something that, you know, if we can get somewhere, will absolutely benefit people all over the state. We know these coal burning plants are all next to waterways. Some are where people get their drinking water from, like ours in Lake Michigan. So this is just, you know, it's critical. So, okay,
Yeah.
so let's see. So there we go. Now we have both. Good. So, so let me ask you first, Rodney. So, you know, which was the worst bill that got passed? And you know, I just because you know, we have to be generous and say, okay, you can name like, I don't know, 5-ish, because I'm sure it's hard to pick one.
Well, if we're sticking with the regular session, I think the one that I think was just probably the worst, both in the way that it was ultimately passed and in the impact that it has, and just its unfavorability across the board, you know, from hardcore conservatives to moderate Republicans to moderate Democrats and you know, progressives. I think the gun bill, the way that it was essentially just kind of crammed in at the last minute in you know, during the very end of session, you know, at the 11th hour, during conference committee, I think that one is by and far, I think that one was probably the one that left the most sour taste in everybody's mouth. And I think right now, in particular, in communities that are, you know, that are most affected by it, it's really having strong, you know, a strong effect. So the permitless carry bill, ultimately what that was essentially just remove the need for individuals to have to get a license, you know, to carry handguns. It was dubbed the constitutional carry bill, and it was opposed by law enforcement across the entire state. It was opposed by, you know, individuals that are concerned with gun violence. It was opposed by, you know, responsible gun owners. You know, there are NRA card carrying members that will tell you, I think that this bill doesn't make any sense. I don't understand what the push was for it. Doug Carter, from the superintendent of the Indiana State Police, Mike Pence appointee, was one of the first. He's made one of the most bold statements, I think, as a Republican, saying, hey, this is what's wrong with the supermajority. I mean, you can't be for law enforcement and then also vote for a bill like this. And you know, I commend him for making a statement like that against, you know, essentially a lot of people that would likely support him otherwise. But ultimately, the impact that that's having now is, you know, we're seeing it in the city of Gary. I mean, I've gotten emails and phone calls from the chief there that's basically saying there are individuals that are carrying now what are pistol gripped automatic weapons that still qualify as a handgun openly, almost as fashion accessories, in places of business where business owners are calling and saying, hey, can you do anything about this? Because I have people that are too afraid to walk into my business because they walk in and they see a guy with a sling that has, you know, an automatic weapon on it. And so and police are essentially forced into a situation where they cannot do anything until there's a law that's been broken. And it's a search and they essentially can't go ahead and just start running everybody's criminal history to determine whether or not they're a criminal or not. That shouldn't, or a serious violent felon, for example, that legally could not carry. But obviously that's a big change from before, where they could say, do you have a permit to carry that, in the first place? So it was very poorly thought out. I think it was, obviously, given the fact that it was rushed in at the very end of session, I think that's indicative of how much thought was really given to it. It's, this idea, well, it's a constitutional right. It's a constitutional right. Well, so is voting. And I still have to show an ID when I go and vote. And so are a number of other issues that we have to do that are regulated, or the number of other constitutional rights that we have that are regulated. So it just made no sense. I mean, it's not as if there was any barrier to it. I think in the committee that was originally voted in, they had even said, well, we'll give provisional licenses for individuals, from the period that they apply until they get their actual license, in order to cover that period, because that was one of the arguments. Oh, well, I shouldn't have to wait to exercise my constitutional right. They had removed the $25 fee for a lifetime license in the state of Indiana. I mean, there were all of the barriers removed. Essentially, this seemed like the coup de grace. Like, well, this was the red meat that needed to be tossed around in order to really, appease this, the gun lobby. And it just, to me, it makes no sense. And I think to a lot of voters in the state of Indiana, it makes no sense. People that, when we're knocking on the doors, and the topic comes up, it doesn't matter what side of the aisle. By and large, it's not a very popular it's not a popular piece of legislation that was passed this last session. So,
well, that is interesting that you're getting that kind of feedback too. And I would ask you to kind of draw a picture for us. What kind of society will we be walking around in now?
I mean, really, it seems like it's the Wild West. That's essentially what we're being, we're essentially devolving into, is this idea that, just everybody carry your guns out in the open, and then that way everybody's going to be safe. Well, we know that that's not the case. I mean, what you're going to have is people that are going to be reactionary. People are going to be, paranoid, scared, defensive. You're going to see, an increase in shootings. And you're going to see, this idea of community start to devolve. I mean, the idea that people don't even want to go into businesses like gas stations because they're too afraid when they look in through the door, they turn around and say, you know what, I don't need a bottle of water. I'm just going to go back to my car and finish pumping gas and leave. Like that is very problematic. So yeah, I mean, I think they've drawn a very grim picture of what, what public safety looks like, and it's exactly what, law enforcement came out and said was going to be an issue for them. So.
Mm-hmm. All right. So any other bills that were horrible and that passed that, we don't know about? What are the secret terrible bills that got passed that we don't know about? Go ahead, Rodney. Yeah, come on. What do you got?
I don't think any of them were secret. I mean, everything was.
Well, I guess
public,
like which one just were not publicly, announced and didn't have as much brouhaha about it.
I agree. The worst one was the permitless carry. I asked the author when he was at the podium, and I said, how hard is it to get a permit? He said, oh, it's really, really hard. I said, no, it isn't. I got one, and it only took a couple weeks, and I have a lifetime carry. And he looked at me like, whoa. But he still said, no, it's really hard to get one of those. It's just hard to get one if you're a felon, or if you've been diagnosed with a mental illness that prevents you from carrying a gun. The rest of it is just a posturing, I think. The state police asked the governor not to sign this because it was just so detrimental to the safety of police officers. Because if you have a registered gun, they can check your license to see if you're safe to carry one. And then at least they know that if you pull one out when you're there, they know you have it. But right now they don't have a clue. And the governor did not veto it, even though a lot of people requested it, including the state police, who are under his control, which makes no sense either. That was the worst, I think, because
Any other just terrible bills that
it
we just
doesn't-
didn't hear as much about?
the was it 1471? Oh, 1740, 1241. I
11.
don't remember the number of it. It was called the trans bill.
Yes.
1040.
That was kind of ugly. That was really kind of ugly, and there was really not much point to it. They brought the bill up. The author was requested to carry it. It was not her bill. She said, I've been asked to carry this bill. It came from another state. She said that they're doing this in 28 other states, which means it's not a bill that originated here in Indiana. And it was to keep only trans girls from participating in school sports. It didn't say anything about trans boys. And it said that, that was unfair. It was against Title IX. But the IHSAA and the NCAA both have rules for how to manage that. So if a girl has been transitioning to a boy, or a boy has been transitioning to a girl, they can measure the amount of hormones and how much effect it's had on their muscle structure and all that. They have the rules in place. There was no need to do this bill, but they did it as a scare tactic because people think that you can be changed by reading a book into wanting to be a girl or a boy. That's not what you were born as. It was rather hateful.
Yes, and even the governor didn't support it.
Right.
So yeah, that was bad. Okay, Rodney, any other bills we didn't hear so much about that you just thought were just horrible?
Yeah, I think Pat had pointed that one out. I thought that was a good one. The other one I thought was was it 1001 or SB1? I can't remember which one it was, but as part of the getting us out of the state of emergency, they removed SNAP benefits, which were essentially $90 per family.
Yeah.
90 per week or per month. I can't remember exactly which it was, but again, SNAP benefits are that's federal dollars. That is not dollars that are coming out of the state of Indiana. Those are dollars that were made available to the state of Indiana, but they were removed by the legislature as as eligible funds to go to families in need of them, which to us just seemed it made no sense. Why would we take $90 out of families that off the table for families that need them? Particularly as if it's not as if Indiana was either in some sort of deficit. We've got $6 billion, but it's not even our money. I mean, this was money that was being made available by the federal government. So it just seemed very cruel. The idea that we need to remove this. It just to us it just did not, particularly and I'm sure in Representatives Boyce caucus, but in the Senate caucus, it was one that we were kind of dumbfounded by because it wasn't necessary. It was just part of what the what the proposal was for the bill. Other than that, there was that, and there was another one. I'm looking at the bills that just passed. There was.
I mean, that one did seem just so, maliciously cruel. I mean,
Yeah. That one was awful.
I mean, just completely unnecessary. I think that's it. There was another one I thought, but I cannot remember what it was.
Well, that's right. Well, let's move on because I do want to talk about some other issues. One of the issues that is now really just emerging. I mean, it's not like it hasn't been there, but it's just really kind of ballooning out of control. And that is, overdose death, particularly by fentanyl. They just sent out the new maternal mortality report, which of course has been done a couple of times now, and a legislature, the Republican supermajority has completely ignored every single recommendation in there, except for extending Medicaid to postnatal moms. But what I want to get at is that the finding this time was that most of the postnatal deaths among new mothers was from drug overdose. The past reports showed a high level of mortality from drug overdose too. And so, Pat, why don't you start? What can we do? What can be done? Where do we start working on this?
Oh, that's a really good question. A lot of there's been a lot of talk about restricting narcotic drugs for pain. But that doesn't prevent deaths after childbirth if you were already using drugs beforehand. But if you're having a lot of pain after childbirth and they give you an opiate drug, you can get hooked, and that contributes to the extra extra numbers. I'm not really sure what we can do other than more mental health services, and more availability of mental health services to people who don't live near anything. It's one of those really unanswerable questions right now, I think, on why people start using drugs. But if they had mental health facilities or mental health, they might not need to start it. I personally I have never been in a situation where life was so hard that I couldn't deal with it. But a lot of people get to that point.
Well, and it seems that people who are using other sorts of opioids, they're just finding fentanyl just mixed in. Apparently, it's cheaper to produce, and it is quick acting and acts like an opioid, but often also kills you. So,
Yeah.
and I think that's one of the big problems. So, Rodney, let's, give us your thoughts on this issue.
Yeah, this issue hits really close. I've had a lot of friends and people that are close to me that have, particularly in our area, that have either gone down that road, and some of them haven't come back. Friends of mine that I grew up playing music with that have passed away from either overdoses or suicides that were drug related, and it's really, really tragic. And I look at kind of how Indiana approaches it and has approached it for a very long time. And so I look at, like, for example, I believe it was 1006 from 2014, where they had the criminal justice reform. And as part of that, they were trying to move people out of DOC and, have low level offenders, which would a lot of times are drug offenders, be treated at the county level. And, so they were taking people that were low level felons, and, you were able to keep them at the county jails. Well, this past year, they said, I believe it was 1004, they were going to essentially reverse course on that, and they were going to be able to send low-level felons back to DOC. And to me, they completely missed the point of 1006 in the first place in these reforms, which was, you need to fund these services at the local level, at the county level, and provide these services to stop recidivism, and to address individuals while you have them, while you have that point of contact. For low-level drug offenders, the idea that most of the time their first offense that they're getting into the criminal justice system, yet you're going to now, because you don't have you have overcrowding at the county level, you're just going to ship them off to DOC, where they're not going to be there for a whole lot of time, but you're going to take them out of their community, you're going to take them away from their family, you're going to take them away from their jobs or any employment opportunities. And instead of just biting the bullet and actually addressing the issue at the local level through either drug court or drug addiction programs, as part of I guess not necessarily putting people through the criminal justice system, but actually getting them help, that's you're ultimately bound to just keep making these same mistakes and just kind of passing it back and forth. And it was one of the things that I made a point of when we were having this discussion on 1004, was when you miss the opportunity to do this, and now you're just kicking you're kicking the can down the road. We're going to have to get serious about actual drug rehabilitation programs, instead of assuming that the criminal justice system is going to fix everybody. So yeah, I mean, that to me is a major part of it. Now, whether or not that solves the issues with maternal mortality as a result, I would hope that once you're actually addressing the problem locally, those services are going to be provided to all, and individuals that are maybe otherwise finding themselves in this caught up in this web are not going to have it, it's not going to be so readily, available, and it's not going to be such a demand for it. That would be the hope. But ultimately, until the state of Indiana actually gets serious about how they're going to approach it. And we've seen this before. I mean, we've seen this idea that, if we avoid it, then the problem will go away. I think the HIV outbreak in Scott County down, in southern Indiana a while back, where, Governor Pence had stated, oh, well, we don't want to do needle shares. We don't want to, go with programs like that. We just got a report back during one of the summer study committees where they were talking about how successful the county was in forgoing the governor's, the governor's order, and continuous, or in providing those services, and how successful it was in both stopping the spread of HIV and helping with drug addiction there. So I mean, we have to get out of this, this backwards way of thinking.
So yeah, I was shocked to see today that our U.S. Congress, almost all Republicans voted against a bill to provide mental health services in schools, and it felt a lot like Indiana.
Yep.
Like all the it's like mental health doesn't exist. I mean, there's we're not going to talk about it. But anyway, actually, I would like to use that to really kind of move into the next issue of public education. So what did we get for public education this year? Anything? And what was missing? And what do we need to do? I mean, because we know we got a ton of money, right? There was CARES Act, ESSER 2, ESSER 3, ARPA. A lot of money went into schools from the federal government, not from Indiana, but from the federal government. So there is funding available. And I know part of the problem, I sit on a school board, and so with their, mental health is a big issue. And there is money to hire mental health professionals, but there are not mental health professionals to hire. There just are not people out there to hire, which is a problem. So, what do we need to fit? And I know we've also got a lot of money that is going to go to safety. I mean, and I think that's intentionally a broad term. And I think schools do have a lot of discretion about using federal dollars to add safety. And in fact, we did get some state dollars this year as well to improve safety. But those are always, generally in response to another school shooting. So, and I will tell you, as a school board member, every time there's a school shooting, I get emails to my school board email, like for, like a bunker you can buy and put in the classroom so the kids can run into this bulletproof bunker. It's really frightening. I mean, it's just all, and of course they made the email that comes with all these graphics of scary guns, and it's just terrible. So anyway, there's no shortage of people trying to make a dollar on school shooting results. So tell us, Pat, what did we get for schools this year? What are we going to do? What are we going to get next year? What do we need? What's missing?
We didn't get a whole lot. We spent a lot of time trying to not make them as bad as they were.
The bills that were offered.
Yes, 1134 was the worst. Eventually, it finally died, but they were trying to jail librarians if they put books in their schools that were not approved books. The attack on education as in general is like scary, but they talked about teachers teaching CRT, which they don't in grade schools and high schools. It might be a subject that can be an elective in a college, but they don't teach that. But that was the general opinion of everybody who voted that wanted that bill, was that we don't want them teaching CRT in our schools. It's just, they don't look at the needs of the teachers or the needs of the kids. They look at the bottom line of how much they take in and how much goes to the schools and how little goes to the schools. And so much of it goes to the charter schools and the private schools by voucher. They give them a bigger piece of the pie every year, but they don't increase the size of the pie. So the public schools lose out, and they're guaranteed by the Constitution. So we really need to kind of do something about that. We did get the money from ARPA, and we did increased the size of the budgets for the schools this year so the teachers could get raises, but it was bragged about by certain people that the state did all this, but they didn't have it in the budget in the first place to do that. So it was because of the ARP money, but nobody ever claimed it that way. I don't think we did anything really good for the schools. We just tried to control damage.
Right. And so, and like, as you said, teachers and schools are being attacked on a daily basis. And of course, now we're looking at, I heard Jennifer McCormick today saying 3,700 positions are vacant, not just teachers, but in school systems, 3,700 vacant positions in public schools around the state.
Bus drivers, counselors, lunch workers.
Right. Right.
Maintenance people, everything. They're
Right.
short of everything.
Professionals. Right. And so how are we going to turn this trend around? How are we going to change the direction? And I love that you point that out. I think a lot of people don't know that our state constitution does guarantee Hoosiers a public education, a quality public education, unlike the federal constitution. So there's certainly something to stand on here when we're demanding a high quality public education. So how are we going to turn this around, Pat?
I don't know. At one point they were talking, was it 2 or 4 years ago, when they took away the superintendent of public instruction as an elected office, and they just made it an appointed office. They wanted to take politics out of education, and then they wanted to just this year or last year just to have school board members run as political candidates. It made no sense at all. I think that was part of 1134 as well. It was a really ugly bill.
Yeah, that was. Yeah, I see your point, the contradiction there. Pretending they don't want politics in school and then requiring school board members to declare a party. Which is bizarre. So yeah, Rodney, what do you think? How are we going to change the direction of our public education in Indiana?
So it's funny because the governor had put out, we got called in the special session, and when you get called in the special session, it can only be at the governor's order, and it has to be for an emergency purpose. And originally it was supposed to be for gas tax and inflation relief. And I looked at it as, I was familiar with the numbers as to the teacher vacancies and the educational support staff vacancies. We had certain districts that were going back virtual during the school year this past year, not because of COVID, but because they didn't have bus drivers. So I was paying attention to this. And so I said, all right, well, this is an opportunity for us to actually, while we're in special session before school starts, we've got $6 billion, what's been reported as a $6 billion surplus. Senator Kadora and I had worked together to propose taking 1 billion of the 6 billion and applying it to the education funding formula, in an effort to really push, for school districts to be able to address their staffing shortages. But really, and of course that the Republicans were not going to hear that. They didn't want to open the budget for those purposes, only for writing everybody a $350 or $325 check. When most people would tell you, I'd rather have good schools in my district than have a $325 check. I shouldn't say most, a lot of people. But what's interesting though is when, in working with the ISTA, the AFT, and some of these other organizations, when they've done their studies, funding and salary isn't always the number one issue. A lot of times it's the lack of respect and the ability to control what happens in their own classrooms. So one of the amendments that we had filed, or the one of the amendments that I had filed during the special session, was to restore collective bargaining rights. And, as part of that, we took away teachers' bargaining rights about over a decade ago. And we've kind of seen this erosion of respect for the profession ever since, where essentially you get to bargain for your salary, you get to bargain for some benefits, but you don't get to say what your class prep time is going to be. You don't get to say what your class size is going to be. You don't get to say what the health and safety standards within your classroom are going to be. Things that in other public servant positions, those individuals get to collectively bargain for that. So I had a conversation with the education committee chair after, after I presented this amendment, and they deemed it non-germane. And, the conversation went, there was a little bit of back and forth as to whether, what rights should be restored. But ultimately, I did look at it as a positive conversation, because I don't believe he understood what teachers were actually wanting, one, and two, that it wasn't necessarily, he had used some really bad example of teachers refusing to sign a contract because of like the certain color of paint on the wall. And this was decades ago, and I think it was really a distorted story to begin with. He seemed to be understanding of the idea that if teachers had these the ability to negotiate for these aspects that other entities or other public servants get to other public service jobs get to negotiate for, they that would quell a lot of the, I think, the loss of teachers in these positions, and in addition with obviously raises that are needed. And so I do think that there's at least hope on the horizon for restoration of some of those collective bargaining rights, which I look as a major positive. But other than that, it's going to be up to us to ensure that we also combat a lot of the probably what are going to be more reiterations of 1134 and some of these other things that teachers just look at as so backwards and so detrimental to the profession that they're already overworked. They're already dealing with students that are 2 years behind following a pandemic, behaviorally, educationally, socially. They're burnt out, and until we get a grasp, we get a good handle on what the teaching profession is going to look like in the state of Indiana, and restoring that respect to that profession, we're going to have a hard time. So I think by hammering that message that it's not necessarily just all about money, it's definitely, there is funding, there's going to be a need for funding, but there's other things that we can put on the table that everybody across the board can agree on. So
yeah, I think, I always like to make that point too, that, not all unions are, getting crushed like the teachers union. They really are singled out.
Yeah.
Other unions, legislature doesn't mess with the steel workers, but the teachers, we can just kind of squish you into nothing. And I always find that interesting that, that one particular union is just such a target for the Republican supermajority. So, oh my God, there are so many things to talk about. And
Can I say one
go
thing
ahead,
about
Pat,
that?
go ahead. Go ahead.
I just want to say that I think sometimes it's the matter of respect is because they think these are all women and they're just doing this as a side job. And it's not that at all, but they treat it as that. They picture school marms. That's the closest I can think to what they're thinking. Because it's a profession. It's not a job. People don't do this because they need the work. They do it because they love to teach. And they make it difficult every day for them to do that.
Yeah.
And
Well, and I will say that,
part of the
before they
problem.
started picking on the unions, the state legislature worked really hard to make it hard to be a teacher. Put in all kinds of requirements,
Yep.
that you had to, achieve to become a teacher. So they made it hard, and then they made it, impossible.
Well,
Go ahead, Rodney, go ahead.
quick, and particularly for school districts, one of the other parts of that, the amendment that we put forward, or that I put forward, was to put a moratorium on opening of any further private or charter schools, or I think it was limited to charter schools. I think that was the only one that we could actually limit, but to put a moratorium on those until the teacher vacancies were under a certain number. So you didn't have school districts that were essentially, fighting each other with, and fighting charter schools in order to get qualified individuals in the door. Because ultimately what we saw in the last session was the idea that, well, if there's a teacher shortage, instead of making the teaching profession a more enjoyable or more respected position, we'll just lower the standards and allow anybody to be a teacher that can talk about math, or that, that has some skill that they can kind of equate to, to a particular topic in school. That's not the issue, or that's not the solution. That all you're doing is watering down public education at that point. What we need to do is ensure that you're putting good teachers into these, teachers that know how to teach into these positions, and you're not forcing these schools to essentially compete for that. It should be a profession that it was historically just respected in a much different way than it is now. So.
Right. And I'd heard recently too that one of the other impacts that all this is having, as we're reducing the qualifications for teachers, that some of that is really included criminal background checking that no longer will happen because the teachers aren't going through the same rigorous process to become teachers where all that happened. And so now we're going to be really looking at some situations where, we're not even sure if that teacher is safe to be in the classroom.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but but of course we can't leave without talking about SEA1 and SEA2. I mean, I know that you both believe that this was the most wrong, upside down possible, insulting gut punch to half of the population in Indiana, and will do all you can to change it. And so mostly it's like, just don't get me started, because then never get out of here. So but I would like it if, and we know that now it is enjoined. Rokita challenged the injunction, but failed at the Court of Appeals level, but is now of course seeking to remove the current injunction on the abortion ban through the state Supreme Court. So so right now there is an injunction. Right now it is legal to get an abortion up to 20 weeks into pregnancy in Indiana. And so we want to make sure people understand that, at least for today. But maybe Pat, you could talk a little bit about SEA2, which was this kind of companion bill that was passed during the special session that provided some crumbs funding for I don't know, that was supposed to suggest that that the Republicans cared.
Yeah, I would say they were crumbs. They increased the budget for a lot of things, for maternal wellness and for mental health and for a lot of social services. But they have a final end date on those because it's going to be another budget year next year. So these will expire, and then it's anybody's guess whether they'll put them back in the budget the following year. It sounded good. They were doing it because they were going to make up for all the problems that were caused by the anti-abortion law. But it only helps if they continue that, and there's no guarantee that they'll do that, which is really frustrating.
And I will say some of that money that is going to the so-called pregnancy resource centers, which are really religious agencies who are, their mission is to convince women not to have an abortion, and not that they're going to help with the pregnancy or the maternal care or the infant
or
care,
the costs,
or the cost of any of that, but just try to put you down a religious guilt trip, I guess.
Yeah. And
So,
another part of the problem is the kids that are already in foster care and not adopted. We'll just have that many more kids.
right. I
And it
believe
won't-
the number's 13,000 right now, I believe, in Indiana.
Yeah, something like
Children
that.
in the foster care system waiting to be adopted.
Yeah, and most
So-
of them are old enough that nobody wants to adopt them.
Right. And
And
so,
it-
yeah,
you know,
so
it
that-
doesn't
that's
happen
an
right
interesting
away.
one.
It's not going to happen. And we'll just
Right.
increase that and not increase the money that's needed to help with them.
Right. And I know, people argue, well, there are many people waiting to adopt newborn babies.
Yes.
So there is a waiting list on that. And so it kind of doesn't make sense. How can there be all these kids waiting if there are people waiting to adopt? Well, and the fact is the people who are waiting to adopt really just want a newborn infant. But all of the children who will end up in the foster system, because they're in they're born into families, they were not intended pregnancies, they were unwanted pregnancies. They were born into families who had no capacity to raise them and knew that, and tried to, would have liked to make the responsible decision to control their family size and within a manageable level for them. Now we'll be faced with, children that they really do not have capacity to care for. And many of those children will end up in the foster system and will not be adopted.
And they'll
So-
suffer from abuse and neglect and everything else before they get to that,
Right.
which is really that much worse.
Yeah. I mean, the trauma and damage of that on, on young Hoosiers will live with us forever.
Yeah.
So, okay, Rodney. So yeah, would you like to give us your thoughts on the, on SEA 2?
So yeah, I think calling it crumbs is absolutely right. I think, we just talked about, the number 6 billion gets thrown around a lot, and 45 million for this Hoosier Family Fund. It pales in comparison to the idea that you have potentially upwards of 10,000 children that are going to be, 10,000 more children that, potentially will be, forced birth children for, in large part, women that already have children. I mean, what we're looking at the numbers and looking at the actual statistics, most of the women that, decided to terminate their pregnancy already had children. And so, the strain that it's going to be putting on families as is, a lot of these points were just kind of glossed over. And listening to, sitting in the both the health committee, and the what, I can't remember what the other committee was, watching, all of these points get raised by all the healthcare professionals, all the social service care professionals, individuals that really were experts in the field as to what the impact of this was going to be and how truly unprepared we were for it as a state. It was alarming because the only counter to that was mostly based on, ideas of religious morality, and this idea of personal beliefs. And so for me, being in my first session, to me, it blew my mind. I really could not believe the conversations that were being handled, where, you had individuals that were talking about in-depth policy and the implications that were going to occur after, if this bill were to be passed, and looking around the room and just not seeing, not seeing individuals across the aisle even paying attention. That to me just was unreal. It went to show how, for some, it was a foregone conclusion. Didn't matter what the testimony was going to be. For others, I think, I do think that there were some across the aisle that felt, and there were some that, like Benita Becker and Ron Alton, to be able to stand up in front of their peers and essentially chastise them for their vote and their lack of understanding of the implications or the impact that these bills were going to have. But yeah, the idea that $45 million was going to somehow solve this issue, to me, was just laughable. I mean, $45 million in the face of, already a housing crisis, a child care affordability crisis, an underfunded education program, 27,000 kids in the foster care system already. Like, it just, to me, I really couldn't believe what I was seeing, to tell you the truth.
So yeah, it is. It's more than you can even get your head around.
Yeah.
So, okay, so we are out of time. So, I know you both have Republican opponents. And so, tell us what is going on with your campaign and what people can do to help you and how people can reach you. Pat, can you go and talk about that?
Okay. I'm walking door to door as much as I can in between meeting after meeting after meeting, because I'm still in office, so I have a lot of things I have to do. I was in Indy on Wednesday for code revision committee, and I got home and I had to stop and take a nap on the way home in a gas station because I was so tired from driving at 6 o'clock in the morning. It's an ongoing process. Every day is tied up. It's wonderful to talk to people at their doors. It really is. I think that makes more difference than anything when you actually get to talk to people. But there's not enough time in the day to do everybody because nobody's at home during the day. So we only walk in the late afternoon and on Saturdays. And my campaign is working on Sundays as well, because that's maybe when you can catch people at home. I'm going to have a fundraiser coming up
Excellent.
it's
Monday,
it's my
the
first-
10th, is that right?
It's my first real fundraiser ever. It's 5 to 8 at Emerson House at this point, unless I get so many people that we have to move to a bigger event face. But as far as I know, we're going to be at Emerson House. My contact information, my email would be Pat4, the number 4, Indiana, and then the number 4. So it's Pat4, and then Indiana spelled out, and then the number 9 at gmail.com. I don't really have a phone number for my campaign. I think
Do
I
you
have
have
a
a
Google
website?
number. I have a website. It's patboy.org
Terrific. And a Facebook page?
and a Facebook page, and I have no idea what it's called because I don't look at it.
I'm
Because
sure
I
you
don't
can get
like,
there from your
I don't
website.
like to use Facebook. My campaign manager is managing my Facebook. It's reelect Pat Boy something, but I don't know all of the letters.
Well,
But if you
people
go
can
to-
find you on Facebook, they can find your website, and they can contact you through your website. And I
Yeah.
know that you would appreciate help with canvassing and phone calling and writing postcards and putting out yard signs and all of those
Yes,
great things to make sure people know about you.
yes. I think a lot of people know about me. A lot of them think of me as a troublemaker, but
Oh, we love
gotta
that about you,
gotta
Pat.
keep trying, right?
Yes, we love that. All right.
Thank you.
Okay. So Rodney, tell us about, before you are in complete darkness, tell
I
us, tell us about your campaign. Tell us how it's going. Tell us what we can do to help you and how we can contact you.
Well, thank you again. Thank you so much for having this. So the campaign's going good. We're knocking a lot of doors, just like Pat. I love knocking doors in Michigan City because I always mention Pat. Just say, hey. So make sure you, you support my friend Pat Boy, and they're like, oh, I know Pat Boy. I love Pat Boy. So it's always great because she does have a lot of support out here. But that's not to encourage you to not work hard, Pat, because it is one of those years. Federal level is definitely affecting us, and we see that at the doors. I mean, most of the time, if we're knocking on an undecided or an independent or a leaning R, resident, there a lot of times they say, I'm not voting for Democrats because I don't like Nancy Pelosi or I don't like Joe Biden. And it's like, okay, well, great, you're not voting for them, so we're here to talk to you about actual issues. We do canvass pretty much every day that we can during the week and on Saturdays and Sundays. If you go to our website, rodneyforindiana.com, or if you go to our Facebook or social media, and really any social media is Rodney Pohl Jr. for Indiana, you can sign up for canvassing events. We have a text banking and postcard writing event that's coming up on October 3rd, this upcoming Monday. That's going to be at 219 Tap Room at 6 p.m. Text banking is a lot of fun. If it's very similar to phone banking, except you get a lot more done. And it's a new day. It's really tough to get people on the phone. A lot of people screen their phone calls. They don't know the number, they're not going to answer it. Yeah. So in order to, and you get a lot more done with text banking. You can do it at your leisure. People can respond at their leisure. And in addition to that, when you're with other people doing this, you can still, socialize. And we're going to be feeding people. We're going to be, there's going to be drinks and and food that's going to be provided. But other than that, we are definitely looking for sign locations. We've got 500 new signs that we have to get out, both large and small. We have like I said, we've got postcards. If anybody wants to write postcards, if you can't go door knocking, there's a lot of work to do. And really my goal is to really win this race for not just myself, but help, all of the down ticket, Democrats as well. I mean, there's a lot of important races that are going to be going on this election as well, both in LaPorte and in Porter County. The sheriff's race is important. The commissioner's race is important. The county council races are all important. But yeah, and then obviously Pat, and then on the other side of me, on the west side of Pat is Chuck Mosley in Porter County, and making sure that everybody crosses the line. I mean, I think the Republicans were really banking on a red wave, and I think that we're going to be that blue undertow that really pulls them down. I'm hoping so.
Great. Great. All
I
right.
hope we
Well,
can do the
thank you
storm
both.
surge.
I just want to, I want to point out to people that these races are critical because this congressional district has been targeted at the national level. And so there is a lot of national money coming from the Republicans into Congressional District 1, in which both of your districts lie. So this is really very critical, and we are going to have to work much harder than we ever had to before in this district to elect Democrats. It's not like it used to be. It used to be a very Democratic area, and Democrats didn't have to worry. But there's a lot of indications that that's not the case. So Democrats are going to have to mostly turn out to vote. So I like to tell people, okay, here's my thing. Okay, registration ends October 11th. You must be registered to vote by October 11th. October 12th, early voting starts through November 7th. So during that time, you have to go to, if you go to indianavoters.com, you can register, you can check your registration, you can request an absentee ballot. The deadline for that is October 27th. And you can find your polling places. You can find your early voting places. Porter County is a vote center, so there'll be about 45 or so places, and you can go to any of them to vote in Porter County. LaPorte County is not a vote center county. So there's only 4 places that you can go in LaPorte County to vote early. And they are 803 Wabash in Michigan City, a little strip mall with the county treasurer and county health department in it. And the LaPorte County Complex, so the building behind the courthouse in LaPorte, the city of LaPorte, at Johnson Road and 400 North, the old Cool Spring branch of the library. That will be an early voting site. And then on Highway 30 in Wanata, those are the early voting sites in LaPorte County. So then also at indianavoters.com, you can see where your polling place is in LaPorte County for election day, November 8th. So you can find all that, and you can see who's on your ballot. So you can see who's on there and, do some research. I know a lot of people say they don't vote because they don't know enough about the candidates. But here's your chance. You can go there and find out who's on the ballot and do your research so you feel confident when you go in there about who you're voting for. And I encourage people to write down your voting plan. We find that helps make sure people get it done. Like, make a note. When are you going to vote? Where are you going to vote? How are you going to get there? Do you need an absentee ballot? And who are you going to vote for? Make a note, because that will help make sure you get it done, just like your grocery list and every other list you do. So please write it down. And of course, please make sure you've got 3 friends who you are taking responsibility for to make sure that they also write down their plan and execute it. So, okay, so we are way over time. I apologize for that. But thank you so much, Rodney and Pat. Oh, Pat's got a note. Yes, go ahead, Pat.
I just want to say, if you want to know about candidates, you can go to vote411.org too.
Yes, that's the
Or
League of Women
Ballotpedia.
Voters site that they do. Some people put stuff up on there and some people don't, which is a little
Yeah.
irritating.
And there's also Ballotpedia.
And there's Ballotpedia, that's another good one. There's another Vote Smart is another one, votesmart.org, that's another one. So yes, there are lots of places to find out the candidates. But if you go to indianavoters.com, you will at least find the list of who will be on your ballot. And then you can go anywhere, Google, whatever, to find out about them. So,
Deb,
all right.
You are fantastic. You are so amazing. I want to thank you so much. You are
Yes.
you are such a wealth of both information and such a powerful force of positivity. And just, I see how you work across the state. So thank you for everything that you do. You're amazing.
Oh, well, thank you very much. That's,
Yes.
So, well, you're very nice. That's all right. It's not about me. So, so stay tuned. We will have more of these candidate forums. The next one will be, when is it, Dahlia? Oh, wait, I got it right here. It will be October 3rd. And this one will be the statewide candidates, not all 3 of them, unfortunately, because they couldn't coordinate, but Destiny Scott Wells,
yeah.
who is the Democratic candidate for Secretary of State. She is doing an amazing job, and that race is totally winnable.
Yeah.
And she's getting some, real, I think, national attention at this race. And so this is an important one. And then also is Abe Brooks, who's running for state auditor. Also a terrific candidate. I mean, super overqualified and, and terrific candidate. So that will be October 3rd at 6 p.m. So keep that on your calendar and we'll be back again for that. So, all right, thanks again. And again, we're from the Progressive Democrats of LaPorte County, and we're just very happy that you could join us. So good night.